Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It is customary here at the Sangha to go around the room and introduce ourselves, and it would perhaps take an extra breath before saying your name so that we can more clearly hear you and more fully sense your presence here today. I'll start. I'm Len.
I'm Brian.
I'm Jack.
Dennis.
My name is David.
I'm John.
My name is Cass.
My
name is Paul. Larry.
I'm Shantanu.
I'm Clint.
Jim.
Gail. My name is Jerry.
Dan.
Peter.
My name is Mark.
I'm Jim.
I'm Jerry.
My name is Roy. I'm Jonathan.
George.
Adrian. I'm Brad. I'm Kay.
I'm Robert.
Paul. Daniel.
Mark. Joe.
My name is Michael.
David.
My name's Robert.
I'm Jerry. Peter. Eric.
My name is Tage.
Jeff.
I'm Jeff.
I'm Hal.
I'm Brian.
Tom.
I'm Ray.
Jay.
I'm Tom. Paul. Risha.
William.
Great. Just to remind those that Adrian is here for the first time and Paul is returning after an absence there. Is there anyone else here for the first time? Please make them feel welcome at social hour. Half hour. Today, our speaker is David Zimmerman. He will present Getting to What Matters from a Zen Perspective. Kanzan David Zimmerman has been practicing Zen for over 20 years, half of which have been in residence at San Francisco Zen Center. He was ordained as a Soto Zen priest in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi by Reverend Teah Strozer in 2006, and spent 8 years at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, where he held a number of positions, including monastery director and head monk. David is now program director for SFZC and lives at the City Center Temple. He also serves on the SFZC Diversity and Multiculturalism Committee, is a co-facilitator of Queer Dharma, and supports Dr. Lipp with classes and workshops on transforming depression and anxiety. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I want to thank Jeff particularly and all of you for the invitation to be here today and share the practice and share a little bit of my expression and experience of the Dharma. I actually have a very warm regard for the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, because when I first started practicing in the early 1990s, this was one of the first places that I came to. Of course, at that time, it was still at the Zen Hospice location on Page Street, and it was called Gay Buddhist Fraternity. So I actually think I was one of the people who said, can we change the name a little bit away from fraternity, which for me had kind of some negative connotations to fellowship. And lo and behold, apparently it happened. So anyhow, I always like being able to get out of San Francisco Zen Center because I live and work there, so I'm kind of in that particular container a lot. And I like going into other sanghas and just experiencing the practice, the different flavors of practice throughout the Bay Area mostly. but also sometimes beyond. So again, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Several months ago, when Jeff invited me to speak, and we came up with this title of Getting to What Matters, from a Zen perspective, to be honest, I didn't really want to be pinned down with the title. So I may or may not express that particular title. I may veer off into maybe the mind of inquiry a little bit. So if you came here expecting something particular, I'm sorry. But my main intention is simply to offer something that would be an encouragement to your practice. So I hope that will be the case. I wanted to start by sharing that on the last day of 2013, one of my primary teachers, Myogen Steve Stuckey, died. And Myogen was the central abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center. He had just been diagnosed exactly 3 months earlier from stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was, in my mind, still young, 67, very vibrant, very sturdy, a great teacher for me. He was one of the few men in my life that I found really expressed and embodied the Dharma, embodied the teachings. So I was constantly looking to him for an expression of the teachings, and I learned so much, and so I greatly miss his absence in my life. And so this, in some ways, is dedicated to him and his teachings. One of the things that I found particularly powerful about his teachings was actually his teachings at the time of death. And during the 3 months in which he continued to show us how to meet with a certain fearlessness, our impermanence, pain, and our suffering. And he even had the capacity to express gratitude for his cancer, to express gratitude for the teachings that it had to offer in terms of letting go of self-clinging and meeting what is, and of not turning away. And he was able to do this to such the capacity that when I went to visit his body several hours after he had died, he had a smile on his face that kind of just said, it'll be okay. This too can be met and moved through. One of Steve's Dharma heirs asked him during his illness, when the students of the future ask about your Dharma, what will you tell them? Or what shall I tell them? And Steve gave this question a thought for a moment, and then he said, endless inquiry. Not turning away from reality. And when you do turn away from reality, stop and resume endless inquiry. Some of you may have heard the anecdote in which a student once asked Suzuki Roshi, Roshi, what's the most important thing? And Suzuki Roshi replied, to find out what's the most important thing. There's another story that close when the time when Suzuki Roshi was on his own deathbed, he comforted a student who had come to visit him and was grieving due to his teacher's pending death by telling the student, don't worry, I know who I am. I know who I am. There's no reason to worry. I think that in responses that both Abbot Steve and Suzuki Roshi gave to their students, that each of them was getting to the heart of the matter. Not just the matter of life and death, but also the matter of discovering fundamentally, who are we? Not turning away from this endless inquiry of who are we? And I think this is the way in which we enter the heart of practice. Here's a poem by Mary Oliver called Summer Days. And if you've been around Zen Center, we read a lot of Mary Oliver poems. So I have to keep up the tradition. Who made the world? Who made the swan? And the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who's eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Leaves you with a very provocative question, yes? Consider for a moment. What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? It's a powerful, demanding question, isn't it? One that requires courage, diligence, honesty, and great patience to go into the mind of inquiry. Did any of you, in considering this, notice if your minds went blank for a moment? Simply unable to come up with an immediate answer. Simply resting in the open space of not knowing. I appreciate how this poem encourages the mind of not knowing, the mind of curiosity. And at the same time, it evokes reverence, awe, and joy in the simple beauty and complexity of a mere grasshopper. And I appreciate the way that the poet brings into the realm of worship, brings us into the realm of worship, in a realm of overwhelming gratitude for the mystery of our life and the potential of our life by speaking about this mere grasshopper. I think it's reasonable to say that this question of how we're going to live our life, how we actually live our life, not what we think about it, not what we say about it, but actually how we live our life is at the heart of all that matters. And it lies at the heart of every deep spiritual inquiry that we have. And perhaps at the heart of why we actually came to Buddhist practice and why we're here today. This fundamental question in Zen is the foundation of what we call way-seeking mind. And this is the mind that seeks to be fully awakened to our innermost, boundless nature. When we live from this innermost nature, when we live from our Buddha nature, we are living the same nature as the black bear and the swan and the grasshopper. as well as that cube of sugar and the grass. And just like the grasshopper going about her business, there's nothing special we need to do to express our Buddha nature. We just need to be who we already are. Knowing how blessed we are, even in the face of our impermanence. The synopsis of my own way-seeking mind story is that I came to practice because I wanted to better understand how to live a life of presence, particularly in the face of death. As I mentioned, I first started practice in the early 90s, and it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and I actually worked at that time at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And a lot of my friends and acquaintances were dying. And also at the same time, my father was dying. He was dying of colon cancer. And he actually was 50, which is how old I am today. So I just had this reflection, wow, I am dead now. Wow. My father and I had never been very close. In fact, for many years he had been absent from my life, and therefore I spent many years in children's homes and foster homes and other situations. And so, knowing that he was going to die, I wanted to find a way to bridge this gap, to reconnect, to be a presence for him in a way that he was never able to be present for me. And so I asked a friend where I could learn how to meditate, because I had heard somewhere that meditation was good for this. This would be helpful. And my friend pointed out and told me about the San Francisco Zen Center, and so I went on a Saturday to their Zazen instruction, and something about Zen practice immediately resonated for me. And so I just started practicing right away. And I would go to San Francisco Zen Center, and I'd come here to the Gay Buddhist fraternity/fellowship, and I would also check out other groups. But mostly it was Zen that stuck with me. One of the first things that struck me when I went to the San Francisco Zen Center was a verse that's on the Han. And the Han, for those you might know, is a wooden block that is struck repeatedly 50 minutes before to call you to meditation. And on the Han is this exhortation to practice. It goes like this. May I respectfully remind you, great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Be awake each moment. Don't waste this life. So I imagine every time the Han is struck, that this is sending out to all of us, resonating as a reminder. Wake up. Don't waste this opportunity. Don't waste this precious life. This also echoes for me one of my favorite lines from a poem by Rilke. We can so easily slip back from what we have struggled to attain, abruptly, into a life we never wanted, can find that we are trapped as in a dream and die there without ever waking up. I won't go into a lot of detail, but my father's life represented a life wasted, of one not waking up, living a delusional dream that was marked by alcoholism and denial and anger and regret. And then he died, which prompted me to say, what am I doing with my life? What way am I like my father? How is my life marked by the same delusion, anger, regret? I didn't want to live without waking up. And so here I am, on this path. I think it's reasonable to say that the grasshopper in Oliver's poem isn't occupied with the question of, what do I plan to do with my precious life? The grasshopper isn't so worried about waking up or the so-called great matter. She's just actively, wholeheartedly going about her business. Eating sugar, fluttering about, washing her face. She's not being all self-reflective and spiritual, She's just living. And she's not even perhaps particularly worried or cognizant of the fact of her impermanence. And maybe it doesn't even matter to her. What matters to her is living now, wholeheartedly, completely, just being with this activity moment after moment. That is the grace of being an insect. So there's no sense of duality for her. No self-cherishing that's arising in her small being. Nothing that calls into question her value, her existence, or place in the world. How many of us can say the same thing about ourselves? For the most part, we humans experience ourselves as stable, persistent beings, perhaps even immortal. So we go about making plans and goals, thinking that we're going to be alive for quite some time in order to see them out. And maybe if we accomplish them in the immediate future, if we don't accomplish them tomorrow, maybe the next day, or maybe a few years from now. Or maybe in some vague, distant future. But we think this will continue in some way. At least I have this tendency. I don't know if any of you do. And yet there's also a sneaking awareness of my own impermanence. That the fact that I am growing older and I'm going to die. And the tension between these two conflicting perceptions of our persistence and our impermanence, essentially the same one that Shakyamuni himself felt, and which set him on his own path of awakening. He freed himself of the plans that his father had set for him for how to have a comfortable, perfect life to the very end. Left the palace, entered the streets, and met the realities of old age, sickness, and death, as well as the disease that comes with them, witnessing them. I read an interesting essay recently by the Buddhist scholar, teacher, and author, David Loy, in which he argues that our true fear is not of dying, but of not existing in the first place. Our true fear is not of dying, but of not existing in the first place. Loy writes that Buddhism essentially points out that it's not death that underlies our deepest fears and mental suffering, but more the immediate and terrifying suspicion that anatta, or non-self, gives rise to. That I am not real right now. I am not real right now. Okay, that's a pretty scary thing, right? Yeah? So how do you feel if I tell you you're not real? You're not real right now. What's your immediate response? If I tell you that you contain no inherent self, nor any substantial or permanent thingness. And not only are you not real and not substantial, but what you take as yourself is nothing but a set of impersonal, mental, and physical processes whose interactions create the illusion of self-consciousness. so you probably really don't want to hear this. And even if you are good Buddhists, I think for some of you, like me, there's the stubborn part that says, yeah, but I'm real enough sitting here right now thinking this, aren't I? You still have this clinging part of us that wants to deny, that wants to attach to our sense of self, our sense of consciousness, and say, this is real, this is persistent, this won't die. And yet, if you're like me, in the face of this recognition of non-self and impermanence, there arises an unsettling anxiety, or if you will, a dis-ease. And this disease, as you may know, in Buddhism is called dukkha. And dukkha is usually translated as suffering. Sometimes it's understood more broadly as frustration, or dissatisfaction, or unhappiness. It's kind of basically, my understanding is, comes from a bit of an onomatopoeia for a word in Pali which means a wheel out of balance. So the sound that a wheel makes, dukkha, 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 that grinding, unbalanced, unsettled feeling that we may feel, perhaps at every level of our being at times. And if you're like me, whenever this sensation comes up, you're going to reach for something that masks it, or soothes it, or distracts me from it. So it might be something mentally distraction. For me, Facebook. I mean, how often did I check my Facebook while I was preparing this talk? Or Netflix, or going on a fabulous vacation, or something along those lines. Or you turn to material things, something that you think materially will replace and fill in this sense of absence that we have, this lack of being. So we buy a new car, or a house, or clothing, or something material that we can hold on to and project onto a sense of permanence. But is that really lasting? No. Or we try to shore up our social standing. Try to get a better job, have more friends, maybe more sex. Anything to feel as if we were real. Anything to shore up our fragile sense of a self and move away from our awareness of a lack of a grounded existence. But what if we stopped trying to move away from this awareness of our lack of own being? What if we tried to stop moving away? What if we didn't experience or perceive our groundlessness or no-thingness as a problem that had to be somehow filled up with objects or covered over with the band-aid of self-improvement efforts or self-help philosophy? David Loy writes in the article that I referenced earlier, from the Buddhist perspective, our most problematic duality is not life against death, but self versus non-self, or being versus non-being. As in psychotherapy, the Buddhist response to such dualism involves recognizing the side that has been denied. If death is what the sense of self fears, the solution for the sense of self is to die. If it is non-thingness, the repressed intuition that the self is a fiction that I am afraid of, the best way to resolve that fear is to become nothing. Let me repeat that last line. If it is non-thingness, the repressed intuition that the self is a fiction that I am afraid of, the best way to resolve that fear is to become nothing. The 13th century Japanese Zen master Eihei Dogen, who is the founder of Soto Zen, the school of Zen that I practice in, sums up this process of becoming nothing through deep inquiry and the renunciation of self-referencing in a well-known passage from a text called a fascicle called the Genjo Koan. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. I think many of you may already be familiar with this, but I find this passage so rich that I come back to it again and again and again and again. It's this deep reminder for me. It sums up, I think, all of our practice. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. So this forgetting ourselves is how we drop our sense of separation and our sense of dualism and realize that we are none other than the world itself. It's how we discover or realize that the nothingness of no self that we fear is not really a nothingness. It's just our sense of self afraid of losing its grip on itself. So when we stop this conditioned habit of self-grasping and self-referencing, we encounter a vast, boundless spaciousness that is the fullness of life. When I stop seeking to be something other, or trying to be anything at all, then life itself comes forward to manifest this one as all of life. You make me, I make you. There is no you, there is no me. There's just lifing happening now. Just lifing, arising in this moment. One giant soup of breath, universal breath, universal awareness. This is another expression of emptiness is actually dependent co-arising. Because there's nothing solid and substantial, because we all together are co-arising, these two things are as they are. So the form of meditation that I was introduced to at the San Francisco Zen Center, in which I still practice, is called Zazen. And Za is Japanese for sitting, and Zen is from the Chinese word Cha, which is from the Sanskrit jhana, which refers to a state of deep absorption in meditation. So Zazen then means sitting in absorption. In Zazen, we become so absorbed in the whole body activity of giving complete attention to our direct, immediate experience of the present moment, that we lose our sense of separate or permanent self. We forget ourself when we are so completely absorbed in this moment as it is. We're not self-referencing. We simply forget the self and open completely to the fullness of this moment. The fundamental instruction in Zazen is basically do nothing. And do nothing means to not move, to not engage or try to fix anything, to not seek. Simply be. Be here with full attention and awareness. In Zazen, we simply soften, if you will, soften and relax into our being. Not resisting anything, even our pain, even that sense of a dukkha or anxiety that we might have, even at a cellular level about our impermanence or lack of own being. We just make the effort to be present. Just being. We already are being. We don't even need to do anything. So stop the doing and just be. Relax into being. This is Zazen. And when we relax into being and do nothing, be idle, if you will, we can simply observe what happens, to note our various experiences, to note the passing phenomena of images, thoughts, feelings, sensations, anything that arises while we're sitting here in this moment. And when we sit this still and this present, we can begin to notice how our mind takes us off balance. And that's why in Zen it's so important to have an upright, alert posture. Because the body's posture reflects the mind's posture, and the mind's posture reflects the body's posture. So the minute you're aware of you're leaning into something, you're leaning forward, you're leaning into life, you want, you desire, or you're leaning away, you're pushing away, you don't want, or you're kind of slouching, ignoring, forgetting. You notice that in the body, but you can almost also notice this posture in the mind. So it may be easier at first to notice the physical posture of resistance, meaning, desire, so on. But the deeper practice is to notice the mental posture. How we go about our lives, meaning, resisting. What is it to be upright, not only physically, but mentally, and in our hearts in the same way? The particular form of Zazen that we practice in Soto Zen is called Shikantaza, which translates as just sitting. And we're sitting not to get anything. We're not sitting to improve ourselves. We're not sitting even to wake up. We're sitting just to sit. That's all we're doing. Just being who we are. But just sitting in this way is actually letting Buddha be Buddha. Letting ourselves be that which we already are, that awakened capacity to manifest. So Shikantaza is the presence and the space in which the fear that the small self feels in recognition of its nothingness and its impermanence, the space in which that fear and anxiety and dukkha can be held with a vast, spacious, and compassionate mind, the mind of Buddha. In his book called Zen Questions, Zen teacher Taigen Dan Leighton has this to say about Zazen as a practice of endless inquiry. So I want to come back to this process of inquiry. What do we plan to do with our one wild and precious life? How do we meet this inquiry from the mind of Zazen? Zazen is a question, an inquiry. Even when sitting quietly, gently, at the core of our sitting is the activity of questioning. What are we doing in Zazen? Each of us have some question that somewhere back there was behind our wanting to engage in this Buddhist meditation. What question has led you to face the wall in Zazen, or to study the self in meditation, asking, what is this? Who am I? There is a question that we have to explore that brings us to the cushion. The point of this practice of questioning, however, is not to discover an answer. Just as we do in Zazen, we aim to sit upright, centered, with ease and restfulness in the midst of inquiry. And yet there is some problem, some question, something we are looking into. How do we practice with this question? There's not just one way to do this, because we each have our own version of this question. But we must realize that there is a question. How do we live this life? How do we take care of this world? Face the problems that we each have in our life, the problems that we share together. So, what is it to sit in your meditation as if it was one continuous question, moment after moment? Sitting in Zazen as if you will never know. Practice is not about knowing. That is the ego mind grasping. Our practice, fundamentally, is one of not knowing. Just being. Are you willing to live without answers? Are you willing to live the inexplicable? Are you willing to be with that in the body? How does it feel to reside in that place in the body in which there are no answers to your questions? When we are in that place, we are able to reside in the direct experience of our life. We're not meeting our life from an agenda or from a plan or an idea of what it should be. We simply are. And this type of questioning gets into our bones, into our flesh, into our marrow. Not because we're trying to do anything, change ourselves. It just seeps in and expresses itself on its own accord. It's what animates us. It's what brings us to life. How will you live your one wild and precious life? Now. And now. And now. So I want to close by reading a poem by Nyogen Steve Stuckey that he wrote just a few days before his death. It's very common for Zen masters to write what's called a death poem. Sometimes they even write one each year, just in case, because you never know. Be prepared. I think it beautifully expresses the way in which all of our being is this all of life, and how we just need to learn to relinquish our grasping for the self or for permanence, and to instead enter the full expansion, the full expanse of our lives. So this is the poem. This human body truly is the entire cosmos. Each breath of mine is equally one of yours, my darling. this tender abiding in my life is the fierce, glowing fire of inner earth, linking with all pre-phenomenon, flashing to the distant horizon from right here, now, to just this. Now, the horizon itself drops away. Bodhi, awake, svaha, which is sometimes translated as wow. Thank you very much. Imagine other times for...
Probably just a couple of minutes for questions or comments.
Yeah, I have a question. I was kind of relieved to hear that there are no answers. But then you suggested that in the city we continually ask, what am I doing with my life? And so I don't understand why we keep questioning when you suggested that we believe that there are no answers.
There's a way in which you can start your meditation with that question. You can start your activity each day with that question. It's kind of like coming to stillness and quietness. You get on your cushion, you sit for a moment, you turn to your breath, you wait till the mind settles a little bit, and then like a pebble into a pond, you simply drop that question. You're not entertaining the question. You're not actively engaging it. You're simply just there. And then it has its own life. So we're not consciously holding it or repeating it all the time. Just every now and then, kind of, what am I doing? Am I here? Am I really present? What is this? Who am I? Who's here? Who's present? And then we become still. So we have to be conscious of this kind of squirming, wanting to get the answer. Notice when that comes up. And if that comes up, just drop the question. Just stop questioning. Just sit there with the experience of being itself. So it's something to play with. Find out for yourself what works for you. Explore that. And I think it's kind of bringing a mind of playfulness to it as well. Does that help at all?
We'll see.
He's already planning.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. When you say the self that doesn't exist, do you mean the ego? Is that in psychotherapeutic parlance? Is that what you mean, or just there's no identity? There's no there.
There's no there. I mean, how do we say this? There is a self in so far as our conditioning, comes together and creates this series of processes, mental, physical processes, And then consciousness kind of grasps onto those and says, here. So selfing is happening in that way. That's our conditioned nature, And I don't know a lot about psychotherapy. I'm not trained, but psychotherapists says, well, how do you we've got this conditioned being, right? So how do we make it a healthy conditioned being? So we're human. We've got it. It's not that there isn't a self. It's that the self doesn't exist in the way that we think it exists.
Okay.
It's not something solid. So.
It was in my wild youth when I was beginning my spiritual practice. At one point there was a siege of urgings to do sort of automatic handwriting.
Do what?
Automatic handwriting, just looking away and your hand moves. And one of the things that came was, seek not, you are found. And it's been a real touchstone for me because I don't do Zen inquiry, but I'm full of questions and adventures. But when I return to that, it's a comfort that our inquiries are not futile. That there is actually an inner home that we return to, that we can actually know where we're going, and that it will be there. Is that for that type of knowledge forbidden in Zen?
Nothing is forbidden in Zen. Part of the process of inquiry is actually getting rid of the self, if you will, insofar as our attachment to it, to see how this conditioned being arises. How is it that selfing happening? To understand that process, to study the self. And once we study it so thoroughly and see that it's actually not substantial, and it, if you will, goes to, falls to the background. What comes to the foreground is actually all of life coming forward, itself. Then, I forget the line that you used. What was the?
Oh, it's gone.
This idea that you just are. Life is life. Your life, your fullness comes forward. Life is living you. It's not us living life. Life is living us. And so when we step out of the self-referencing, we actually get all of life. It's no longer just this little box of being that we identify with all the time. We're actually all of life. Everyone in this room, so you can feel that in your gut. There is no separation here. It's all just presencing in this moment.
David, may I ask, will you be out in the lobby during social time for additional questions or comments? Was there anyone, did I miss somebody's hand for burning? No, we're going to... I can't see you over there. My back is...
The man behind the pole.
Sorry.
It's very much related, which is a question around that duality of, or my confusion around the duality of the goal to become nothing, in my just sort of logic train of that presupposes something that you are becoming nothing from.
Don't have the goal of becoming nothing.
Okay.
Drop the goal. You're already nothing. The goal is applying the idea that there's something to become. It's actually removing the idea. It's removing the goal. You don't have anything to do. There's nothing to become. You already are.
Thank you.
Anytime we lean into becoming, we're already off balance. We're already entering into dukkha.
We don't want to do that. So. What we want to do is tell you that there will be a host coming around. Oh, no, before we do that, before everybody gets nervous, next week, Sangha member David Lewis will be speaking. And he's been following the Dharma path for 40 years, has a degree in comparative religious studies. He will be offering a 3-part series of talks on the 3 characteristics of existence: anicca, impermanence; dukkha, unsatisfactoriness; and anatta, not self.
Good follow-up.
So, there will be a host walking around during social time to accept dana donations, and dana comes from the Pali language, which means generosity, and the Sangha needs your generosity in order to sustain its work, its overhead rent, its ministry, outreach to the prisoners who they send newsletters to, and to the Larkin Street youth, who they provide, we provide a meal for once a month. So your generosity is appreciated, and it's suggested that $10 is an amount that would be very helpful to the Sangha. Thank you. Is there a host? Yes.
I'm your host. There are snacks out there. There is tea. There are cups by the sink. If you use a cup, please wash it and return it to the drying rack. If you want to be on the mailing list, there's a sign-up over on that wall there, I believe, on the counter, and please include your email and physical address. And some of us go to lunch and meet at the door around 12:30.
Great. Are there any other brief announcements? Yes.
I just want to thank David for coming here on this Sunday and sharing his experience with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, David will be available during social hour, and again we have Adrian and Paul to welcome. Can we join hands with a circle? By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow, and may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.